Good evening. You are welcome to our live broadcast on the tutorial on great powers rivalry. Great power rivalries throughout the 20th century. And the last time we met, once more, the network has been quite bad here, but we'll try as much as possible to deliver the lecture. Just like I was saying, the last time we met, I was able to let you know how great powers policies influenced what later culminated to be the First World War. Today we'll be discussing how those policies throughout the 20th centuries have influenced another war, which is the Second World War, and also ended up becoming the Cold War, which almost throughout the 20th century, the world, for the first time, had two superpowers who clashed with each other, and these superpowers' influence also created what we know as the Second World War. But before, I think it's best we do some recap of what actually happened before the First World War. We all knew how I was able to explain that in 1888, the leader of Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm II, foreign policy changed. And once that policy changed, it had an effect on the balance of power. It had an effect on the balance of power situation, which later culminated into what we call the First World War. And once that First World War is a war which had its influence over so many nations. So many nations were affected by the First World War. But the Second World War did happen because of the policy mistakes or miscalculation that was made at a place called Versailles. Some decisions were taken which later influenced the policies which later affected other nations, which led to the Second World War. But I must say that the Second World War is an offshoot of what happened with the First World War. The Second World War is an offshoot of what happened in the First World War. In the First World War, arms race were raised in the 19th century. The naval arms race, the military alliances, the Dual Alliance, the Entente Cordiale, and later the Alliance, the Triple Alliance. All these led to what ended up as the First World War. The events at the Balkans, and even later, some of those events at the Balkans, you remember the explanation I gave to you as regards the killing of the Archduke Ferdinand. All this created the notion which ended in the First World War. And one issue which came up during the meeting at Versailles was the fact that at Versailles, at that meeting, some decisions were taken which later was not, those decisions taken were not palatable with those who lost the war. And who are those who lost the war? One of those nations who lost the war, the Ottoman Empire, which was affected so much by the war ending not in its favor. And also, not just the Ottoman Empire, we also have the Germans who lost that war. This and the the Austro-Hungarian Empire also were part of those who lost the war. But the war was lost majorly by people, the Ottoman Empire, because the Ottoman Empire, who had control of most places in the Middle East, found out that by the loss of the war and by the decisions taken at Versailles, everything seemed to have tumbled against it. All those nations which were its colony or controlled by it were all lost, and they became nations as a result of the decisions taken at Versailles. And one thing which happened, immediately the Ottoman Empire lost. Remember, the Ottoman Empire had always been a weak, sick baby, even in the 19th century. The Ottoman Empire had always been a sick baby, weak, but other powers had always shored it up, defended it one way or the other. Remember what happened at the Crimean War, where the Russians were looking for a way to take some territories of the Ottoman Empire, but for the support of the British, that never really happened. The Ottoman Empire had always been an empire, if you trace it back, had been an empire that has influence on Europe. So many states, nationalities in the Balkans had been under the tutelage of the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire had always been that a power which had always either been its roots not properly defined. Is it Asian or Europe? Sometimes the Ottoman Empire had always created that empirical question, which we call the Eastern question. Is Europe in the East? Is Europe in the West? Those kind of questions have always been answered. And even till today, we still see the offshoot of the Ottoman Empire sometimes saying we are Europeans. Sometimes its geography is in where? It's in Asia. But with the defeat of the Ottoman Empire, so many nations came up from the Ottoman Empire. With the defeat of the Ottoman Empire, so many nations came up from the Ottoman Empire. Nations such as Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and so many nations came up. Lebanon, Syria, all these nations stood on its own, but so many of them were still mandate nations. Mandate, which means we are divided either to the British or the French. And one of those groups who suffered so much during this breakup was a group of people called the Kurds. The Kurds, they suffered so much during this breakup. And today you can find the Kurds in Syria, Lebanon, so many places, Iran, Iraq, and all that. The Kurds continue to have one issue or the other. Then, of course, Lebanon was created. Even the Arabs still show their anger by the creation of Lebanon, because it was believed it was created by the French to appease the Maronite Christians. And because of this, sometimes you could see the politics in Lebanon even till today. So many of you would have heard of the Hezbollah and all that. You would have seen the politics of different groups coming up to try to control the politics of that place. So the defeat of the Ottoman Empire created so many of these things, created the situation where so many states were created as an offshoot. Remember that in the Balkans, the Ottoman Empire was originally the controller of those places in the Balkans. But the Austro-Hungarian Empire had tried to dominate it. But all these groups lost in the First World War. And all those lands in the Balkans also were broken. Places like Croatia, Czechoslovakia, and all that places, they were all made to become independent. Whereas in the Middle East, all those places that were broken were either given to the British, the French, as mandate states, which means states that were to be controlled by either these two great powers. So you could see that the influence of the First World War is not even just an influence which was there only in Europe. It also had its influence in Asia, which is the Middle East, also had its influence in Africa, if I may come in places like Cameroon, which was a land originally colonized by Germany. That's why if you go to Cameroon today, you hear French Cameroon and also British Cameroon and all that. That's why today you hear of the language issue, where the French is accused of being overbearing on those of the British Cameroonians. The French Cameroonians were seen to be overbearing on those of the British Cameroonians. Apart from that, Germany was made to pay reparations. These are policies which, out of multilateralism, created by a man who was the president of the United States of America, WWII. It was a creation through him, that multilateral states, an organization would be created, which the organization later culminated to become what we call the League of Nations. That organization culminated to what we call the League of Nations. You could see that from this perspective, multilateralism came up instead of the old bilateral balance of power system. The old bilateral balance of power system, which so many persons, so many scholars have seen as part of the reasons why the First World War came. In multilateral states, multilateralism was now something which was a creation of WWII. Came up to Europe and told them of the 14-point agenda, where nations will come together and discuss issues that has to do with peace. But at Versailles, so many decisions were taken, but those decisions were so much anti-Germany. It's clearly now that it's anti the Ottoman Empire, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire has been broken to pieces through the Balkans. So you could see that so many things did happen after the First World War. The victorious powers were happy with that victory, and as such, forced his influence on those who lost the war. And the influence also moved, his policies also moved to affect places in Africa, places in Asia, which I've been able to explain to you. It affected places in Africa, places in Asia, which I've been able to explain to you. So you could see that the defeat of Germany, the defeat of the Ottoman Empire, the defeat of the Austro-Hungarian Empire had created some form of new world order in the world. Nations prior to the First World War that did not exist began to exist. Nations prior to the First World War that did not exist began to exist out of the fact that the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and even the Germans were defeated. And the defeat of Germany meant that Germany was even forced to pay reparations. Germany was forced to pay reparations. And the reparation Germany was forced to pay created a situation which made the Germans impoverished. And that period where after the First World War, at the decade immediately after the First World War, the loss of Germany and its other groups was in 1918, 1919, the Versailles Treaty was held and all that. After the defeat of Germany, a new system of a new government came into power, and that government which came into power is called that period is called the Weimar Republic. And the Weimar Republic is a group of Republicans who tried to create a Republican system from Germany. Remember that prior to the First World War, Germans were ruled by the Chancellor and also the Kaiser, which is the king. And that was how it was done. But immediately after this First World War, a new system of leadership of government came up. And you remember one of the major nations that changed the whole thing. The Americans joined in that war, and also the British. The Entente Cordiale had the British added to it. And for the British and the Germans, they were supposed to, I'm talking about before the First World War, they were supposed to be close allies because in terms of the monarchy, both can be traced to the Hohenzollern monarchy. Both can be traced to the Hohenzollern monarchy. But for some reason, interests differ and war started. And with the Weimar Republic, Germany became impoverished. America, who came with the multilateral system, changed its policy to isolationism, and the isolationism view of the American people meant that America went back to its cocoon, But even America going back to the cocoon, the companies in America were becoming globalists. They were, for instance, a lot of loan went to Germany through companies in America, the banks in America. A lot of companies, the American companies, went abroad to invest and do so many things. So you could see that all this were happening even though America was practicing isolation. But in its foreign policy, America did not join the League of Nations. They left other great powers to do that. America did not join the League of Nations. They left other powers to do that. And because they left other powers to do that, it became one of the weaknesses of the League of Nations. Because a major power, not yet a superpower then, was out of it. Even in 1926, the Germans were brought even into the League, but the League was not that strong. So you could see that with all this, the arrangement made after the First World War made the foreign policies of the great powers also become a clash on its own. Made the policies of the great power also become a clash on its own, and created what later culminated in the creation of a German, agitated German state, created what later became a creation of the agitated German states. What I mean by that is that the German people were not having it easy. The economy was poor. The people they just left war, and the situation was quite bad. And as such, they would listen to political leaders who would try to tell them that, of course, they would, when they come into power, these powers, when they come into power, when they come into power as leaders of Germany or leaders of wherever they want, they feel that would invariably, people are always looking forward to see to see someone who would deliver them. And that was how a man such as Adolf Hitler came into power, and the Nazis, because of the rhetorics which they made. They won't be going into all that. We are dealing with the policies which created these things. We are dealing with the policies which created this situation. Sorry, the network has been quite terrible. But let's try it one more time. If it doesn't work, we'll have to find other means to deliver the lecture, to deliver the tutorial. I want to say that I'm quite sorry. It happens that way. So I will try as much as possible to be as fast as possible, so that those of you listening to me would understand better. But a leader came into Germany. So let's start from there. A leader came into Germany. That leader who came to Germany kept on hammering that he would deliver the Germans. And the policy of this leader was one that is aggressive, anti-Jew, claiming superior Aryan race and all that. And this leader's attitude created a lot of things which ended up culminating in the Second World War. The attitude of this leader created a lot of issues which ended up creating the Second World War. I think we should not so much dwell on his policies. We will just look at the foreign policies of this leader. He was aggressive, was interested in taking lands, was not shy about it. Took Czechoslovakia, took Austria, and what culminated and created was the fact that the leader, which is Adolf Hitler, decided to take a place called Danzig in a place called Warsaw in Poland, and in September 1939. And this triggered other nations who had been reluctant. Chamberlain and co. had been reluctant to start a war with Adolf Hitler, but they had no choice after the taking over. In Britain itself, a new leader came into power, Winston Churchill, who they did not like the appeasement policy of Chamberlain, and this new leader, Churchill, decided to take it out with the Germans. Even in 1938, Chamberlain, who was the leader that was deposed or removed, of course, through politics and democracy, they practiced democracy then. Chamberlain had a Munich agreement where some agreements was made with the Germans, but They found out after the taking of Danzig and the defeat of the Polish military, they found out that there's no way they could allow this leader to continue in his aggressiveness. And as such, Churchill decided to confront the Germans. The Germans, Blitzkrieg, they call their strategy. We are able to defeat nations, even up to France, and France was even divided into two: Vichy France, and also a place, 2/3 of the land given to the Germans, 1/3 controlled by the French. So you could see how the Germans were able to push their way. But the Germans were not doing this alone. The Axis power then was Germany, Japan, and Italy. These three powers were like a replica of what happened in the First World War, challenging the status quo. Challenging the status quo. But at the end of the Second World War, the Germans, I don't want to go into the details because of the network, the Germans lost this war this time around. Not only lost this war, also had so many of his people killed, his cities destroyed. And prior to the period they would be defeated the Germans would be defeated, three leaders, Roosevelt, Churchill, and also Stalin, were looking at post-German victory. The victory over Germany. They were looking at it and what they intend to do after the defeat of Germany. And they met at a place called Yalta. Roosevelt and Churchill all were there with their counterparts, Stalin. Together, these new allies, Russia, Roosevelt representing the United States of America, Churchill representing Great Britain, Stalin representing the Soviet Union. They were all there, and while there, these three allied leaders toasted to their victory. But while they were toasting to their victory, they had three different agendas. While they were toasting to victory, they had three different agendas. What do I mean? Three differences were there. The differences were reflected in the discussions of the three leaders at that place called Yalta. One of the, let me just try to encapsulate those differences. For Churchill, for instance, it meant to him a free, Churchill, remember, represents Great Britain. It meant to him a free and democratic Europe. It meant to him a free and democratic Europe that Britain would lead. So Britain was already seeing itself as a leader of Europe once Germany is finally defeated. And for Stalin, it meant increase in Soviet power. Increase in Soviet power. For Stalin, it meant increase in Soviet power. And that increase in Soviet power for Stalin, what that simply means is that the USSR will be safeguarded from Western attacks or aggression. The USSR will be safeguarded from Western attack or aggression. So that is what Joseph Stalin saw. Churchill saw it as, oh, a free and democratic Europe is at hand with our defeat of this place, of the Germans, with our defeat of the Germans. And for the United States of America, they saw something even more different, which shows the superpower nature that the United States of America began to envisage for itself. The United States of America saw it as a period of prosperity, a period where democracy will be taken all over the world, that all nations would become democratic. All nations will become democratic. I must say that after the Second World War, the victorious powers of the Second World War, I've mentioned it. United States of America, led by Roosevelt, although Roosevelt, 2 weeks after Yalta died and Harry Truman took over. The USSR, led by Joseph Stalin, and also that of Great Britain. Remember, France was more or less not even there. The French had been defeated. 2/3 of France was, if not for the fact that Germany was defeated, France would not be in the state which we know it today. 1/3 belonged to Vichy France, which means with French leader ruling over that. The other 2/3 led by the Nazis controlling. I'm talking about the land of France now, not even. So the French had been defeated. Most nations in Europe were under the Germans until things changed. And why did those things? Let me just quickly go into that. There was a serious miscalculation. We are back. There was a serious miscalculation of Adolf Hitler. He sent his soldiers to the USSR while getting into Moscow. The winter had come. Remember, a century before that, in the 19th century, there was a man called Napoleon Bonaparte, who almost the same thing happened to him. By the time Napoleon was getting to Moscow, it was winter. But Napoleon even have the code in Russia. He still lost so many of his soldiers. But in the case of Adolf Hitler, he gave a directive that the soldiers should stay put and fight it out in Moscow. Clothing were poor. Food, logistic-wise, was poor. Water also was poor. And no matter how strong, remember, these are soldiers who had defeated so many European nations. The Danish and co. So many nations have been defeated. But while at close to Moscow, lost a lot of soldiers. And this hampered and influenced and changed the course of the war to begin to favor the victorious allies. So while at Yalta, I'm going back to Yalta, these three leaders, although they were in celebrative mood, they had different agenda or policies for the world. They had different agenda or policies for the world. They had completely different agenda. And to even worsen it, 2 weeks after that celebration was made at Yalta, 2 weeks after that celebration was made at Yalta, surprisingly, Roosevelt died. and Truman came into power. But after that defeat of Germany, one nation remained so powerful, almost unscattered, and that nation is the United States of America. One nation remains so powerful, almost unscattered, and that nation is the United States of America. And the United States may have even just lost about 400,000 compared to what Russia lost. You would know that they were it was just a minimal thing. Although 400,000 lives is not something minimal, but compared to what Russia or even other European nations must have lost in terms of percentage, the United States lost about 400,000 soldiers. But many and also many more were injured. But we will not be dwelling on the numbers of those who were injured. But however, everything that has to do with United States of America remained unscattered. And after the war, the army became stronger, the navy became stronger, the air force became stronger, the economy was at its best, his companies were more or less unscattered, nothing affecting most of the company. Even when they were practicing isolationism, they still had companies who could engage the world. In terms of social, in terms of culture, the United States was already influencing the world. Places like New Orleans, music, movies, Hollywood, we are going, and people are one way or the other being influenced by it. So by the time even Truman came into office, remember Truman came to take over from Roosevelt because Roosevelt had died. By the time Truman came into office, the United States was more or less, I would say, more or less unscattered, and it became what I call a big power, which you would now see that it became a superpower. You will now see that it became a superpower. For instance, by 1947, the United States produced half of the world's manufactured goods. 57% of the steel of the world, 43% of the world's electricity, and 62% of the world's oil. So you could see that the United States, I wouldn't say that they benefited a lot after the Second World War. They benefited a lot after the Second World War. But another nation became the second most powerful nation after this Second World War. Another nation became the second most powerful nation after the Second World War. And that nation, the Soviet Union, although they lost so many, about 20, it was estimated about 20 million Soviets died, soldiers, and also soldiers and also civilians all died. But the situation also is something that made the Soviets even stronger. And made even the Soviets even stronger. But it affected how the two nations later saw the situation, later saw how they will handle issues after the Second World War. Remember, the Soviets had lost a lot of people. The Americans lost very minimal and was thinking about its leadership of the world. And the Americans, while they were seeking peace for the world, the Soviets were seeking that aggressors would be deterred from attacking Soviet Union. So you could see that the two leaders had two completely different agendas. But both groups were more or less the strongest that came out of the war. France was almost dead, but thank goodness it came out from the from where it was almost in a coma. Britain was at its weakest. So two nations, Japan was had this the bombing of Japan made Japan almost in a beggarly state. Almost in a beggarly state. You could see about 120,000 Japanese died alone through the bombing of Japan. About 120,000 Japanese died alone in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. About 120,000. And the horror that this brought. And for the first time, the world saw a weapon, the atomic bomb, that had never been used in the history of wars. And this created, I would say, created so much fear in the people of the world. This created so much fear in the people of the world. And this allowed for a rethink, and thereby multilateralism was brought back. The United Nations was created, and just like Churchill said, he said only a madman would even dare using the later on, which is in 1952, the creation of the nuclear bomb. In 1953, the Soviets also created their own bomb. Just like Churchill said, he said, look, only a madman would even dare using it because of the catastrophe that will cause. So with the nuclear weapon, that the world so much feared to be used, and multilateralism through the United Nations, a new world order emerged. But this new world order had two powerful nations which culminates as the superpowers. Had two powerful nations, the USSR and also the United States of America. But the USSR had believed and felt that for it to properly safeguard itself against any form of Western aggression, Eastern Europe has to be theirs. Eastern Europe has to be there. So the USSR was thinking of dominating Eastern Europe, and places like